The Elven king ignored
I
all
never
brides
thought I'd
chosen
find
for
someone
him,
who
until the
understands this
peasant
world the
girl
way you
walked
do.
away in silence. The people said that magic ran through the very stones, older than the first Elven kings, older than the forests that cradled the city. Within these towers lived Thalion, the Elven king, whose beauty was whispered of in hushed awe across lands. His hair was the color of midnight silk, his eyes deep pools reflecting storms and longing. Yet despite all his glory, he was alone. From the day he took the crown, Thalion had been offered brides from every noble house, daughters of kings, queens, and merchants alike. They were adorned with jewels, garlands of silk, and whispers of ancient promises. Yet one by one he ignored them. He would greet them politely, even ceremoniously, but no smile ever touched his lips and no warmth softened his eyes. Whispers of a curse followed him through the court. Some said no woman could ever reach his heart. Others said the king's heart had been sealed by some dark magic. Still, Thalion remained a king of striking presence. His voice, calm yet commanding, could silence the crowded halls. His steps alone were enough to draw attention, yet he moved like a shadow among the glittering light, untouchable, distant, and unyielding. On a morning that carried the chill of winter's last breath, the court gathered for the arrival of yet another bride. The banners of Elenethir fluttered in the soft wind, and the sound of soft lute music filled the hall. Each noblewoman arrived with her retinue, her attendants, and her dreams of winning the king's favor. Their gowns shimmered, their smiles were perfect, but in Thalion's eyes they were invisible. He observed them all from the high dais, his posture straight, his expression calm as the glassy lake outside the palace walls. One by one they came forward, offering jewels, praise, or promises of devotion. Each bowed gracefully, each spoke words rehearsed and practiced. Each failed to stir him. Among the crowd a murmur began to rise. Courtiers exchanged looks of confusion, some of annoyance. "Another rejected," one whispered. "The king will never choose any of us," another murmured. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened quietly. It was not a grand entrance, nor was there music to herald her presence. She was a peasant girl. Her hands were roughened by labor, her hair caught loosely in a braid, and her clothes, though neat, bore the simple mark of her village. She did not come to be a bride, and yet all eyes fell on her. Her name was Leora. She had traveled many leagues to deliver a message to the king, a plea for help from her village. Crops were failing, wells running dry, and a shadow of sickness had begun to drift through the fields. Leora's voice, steady and clear, carried her plea without embellishment or fear. "I come from Elven, your majesty," she said softly, yet with a strength that drew the attention of everyone in the hall. "Our village suffers, our people are in need. Please, I beg your mercy and guidance." For a moment, silence filled the chamber. The noblewomen shifted uneasily. Such a girl, unadorned and unprepared, dared to speak to the king directly. Yet Thalion's eyes, sharp and unyielding, did not turn from her. He listened, and in that quiet something unexpected happened. For the first time in decades, a stir moved in his chest, a curiosity, a spark, subtle yet undeniable. After she had finished, she bowed lightly and began to retreat, expecting nothing more than dismissal. But Thalion rose. The hall seemed to pause, the music dying to nothing but the beating of distant hearts. "Stay," he said. The word was soft, yet carried the weight of command. Leora froze, startled. No one had ever spoken to her like that, and certainly not a king. Slowly she turned, meeting his gaze. It was the first time she noticed the storm hidden behind his calm exterior, the loneliness and power that clung to him like a shadow. "You speak truthfully," Thalion said. "Most come with gifts or flattery. You come only with words and courage. That is unusual." Leora lowered her eyes respectfully. "I speak only what is needed, my lord. The people of my village depend on you. They trust that you will hear them, even a girl like me." Thalion studied her, feeling a strange pull he could not name. No noblewoman had ever dared such honesty, such fearlessness. There was a quiet dignity in her, a light that seemed untouched by the court's vanity and intrigue. Yet despite his curiosity, he did not command her to stay. He offered her protection, a token of his favor that would ensure her safe return to her village. It was a delicate gesture, subtle, almost shy for a king so feared. Leora accepted the token with a bow, but then, silently, she turned and walked away. She left the hall without a word, her steps light but determined, leaving behind whispers and wonder. The courtiers gasped. They could not understand why a king, so powerful, would offer anything to one who had no claim to riches or title, and why she had chosen silence over gratitude. Thalion remained on the dais long after she had disappeared from view. The silence of the hall pressed around him, yet it felt strangely alive. Something had changed, though he could not yet name it. The curiosity that stirred within him was not fleeting. It dug deeper, probing memories he thought were long buried, memories of loneliness, of longing, of a heart untested. For days afterward, the king could think of nothing else. He walked the palace halls alone, touching the carvings of the crystal walls, seeing them not as treasures but as mirrors of isolation. Each step echoed the one before, a rhythm of emptiness. And yet in every echo he heard the faint sound of her voice, the calm strength that had entered his world like a sudden dawn. Meanwhile, Leora returned to her village. She did not speak of the court, nor of the king's piercing gaze. She worried for her people, for the crops that lay withering, for the children who needed food. Yet even in the simple, daily rhythm of her life, she could not erase the memory of the king's eyes. There had been no warmth, no promise, yet something in that glance lingered, like the trace of a melody that refuses to leave one's mind. Back in the court, rumors began to spread. Courtiers whispered about the peasant girl, about the king's unusual attention, about the token of favor. Is he falling for her? Some dared to ask, others scoffed. Impossible, he chooses no bride, he has never chosen anyone. But Thalion did not hear them. He walked in silence, studied the maps of his lands, and listened to the voices of his advisors as though through a distant fog. His mind returned again and again to her, the courage, the honesty, the way she had refused to ask for anything beyond what was right. Something had been awakened in him, a pull toward life, toward connection, toward a choice he had never been free to make. On the night of the full moon, Thalion wandered the palace gardens alone. Silver light spilled over the fountains, glinting off the crystal that lined the paths. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and he spoke to the night, though there was no one to hear. "Why do you haunt me, girl I have never truly known?" he whispered. "Why do I feel the pull of something I cannot yet name?" The wind rustled the leaves as if answering, carrying a faint, distant echo of laughter, soft, steady, brave. He closed his eyes and let the memory of her courage settle into his heart, unsure whether it was fear, hope, or something entirely new. By dawn, Thalion had made a silent decision. He would not send soldiers to fetch her. He would not demand her presence. But he would learn more. He would see the truth behind her strength, the reason her courage had stirred something in him that no courtly display ever could. And so, the king of Alenethir, feared and unyielding, found himself waiting. Not for a bride, not for a noblewoman, not for the promises of others, but for the peasant girl who had walked away in silence, leaving behind a spark that threatened to change everything. The palace remained grand, the halls glittering, the courtiers whispering. Yet in the heart of the king, a storm had begun to form, a storm of curiosity, of longing, of something dangerous and beautiful. And somewhere beyond the towers and the silver rivers, the girl he had never chosen yet could not forget went about her daily life, unaware of the ripple she had caused in the heart of a king. That night, the moon shone brighter than usual. Its light fell on the crystal towers, on the empty throne, and on the silent king. And for the first time in many years, Thalion felt the stirring of hope, of something fragile and new that perhaps, For the first time he might choose. The village of Elven lay hidden among rolling hills and thick forests, a place where sunlight filtered softly through the leaves and the air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. Life had always been simple here, filled with daily toil and quiet routines. But for Leora, the past weeks had grown heavier. Crops withered in the fields, animals grew restless, and a strange shadow seemed to linger at the edges of the forest. Leora moved among her people with a quiet determination. She had returned from the palace, bearing Thalion's token of protection, yet she had not told anyone of the king's presence or of the strange pull she had felt in his gaze. Still, the memory haunted her, the way his eyes had studied her, searching and yet guarded, as if he sought something he could not name. One morning, as she walked through the village square, a chill wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of smoke and something unnatural. Leora's heart tightened. She had seen signs of trouble before, but never like this. Villagers hurried past, whispering of shadows that had appeared near the river and of strange noises in the night. Livestock were missing, and the crops that had survived were now wilting faster than ever. Determined to understand the danger, Leora set out toward the forest's edge, where the sunlight struggled to break through the thick canopy. The air grew colder, and the sounds of birds and insects vanished, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the very earth itself. As she stepped carefully among the roots and stones, she sensed eyes watching her, hidden, patient, waiting. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It moved silently, blending with the darkness, yet it carried a presence she immediately recognized. Thalion. "You should not be here alone," he said, his voice calm yet carrying an edge of warning. The midnight silk of his cloak rippled as he stepped closer. "The forest is not safe for one without power." Leora met his gaze steadily. "I have faced danger before, my lord. I will not let my village suffer while I hide in fear." He studied her, the faintest trace of admiration in his stormy eyes. "You are braver than most who come before me, but this is not bravery, it is peril. There are forces at work here that do not answer to mortal hands." Leora swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She had always known there were mysteries in the world, ancient tales of magic, curses, and creatures that roamed beyond human sight. But to hear them spoken by the king in his calm and measured tone made them real in a way that frightened and compelled her. "What do you mean?" she asked. Thalion stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow path. "The shadow you see is not merely illness or famine. It is older, darker, a curse that was awakened long ago and now it seeks life where it can find it." Leora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "A curse? What can we do?" "The first step is to understand it," Thalion said. "I will stay with you, but you must trust me completely. Even then, it will not be easy." They moved together through the forest, the silence between them heavy yet charged. Leora noticed small details. The way he moved with a predator's grace. The way his eyes seemed to see far beyond the trees, into places she could not imagine. And yet, there was a vulnerability in him, hidden beneath layers of control and command. It made him human, despite the aura of power that surrounded him. As they approached the river that ran through the forest, the air grew colder still. The water, usually clear and sparkling, was now dark, almost black, and it rippled as if moved by an unseen hand. Shadows clung to the surface, twisting and writhing like living things. Leora stepped back instinctively. "What is this?" Thalion knelt by the water, his fingers barely touching the surface. "This is the first sign. The curse seeks to grow. It feeds on fear, on doubt, on despair. And it has chosen your village as its next cradle." She shivered, feeling a wave of helplessness. "How can we stop it?" "By facing it," Thalion said simply. "By confronting what lurks in the shadows, we deny it power, but it will test you, Leora, and it may test me as well." The forest seemed to hold its breath as he spoke, the hum of magic growing louder. Leora realized that this was more than a task. It was a trial, one that would demand courage beyond what she had imagined. Over the following days, they worked together. Thalion taught her to sense the unnatural currents of magic, to read the subtle signs of the curse, and to move with awareness rather than fear. Leora learned quickly, her determination and clear mind making her a capable companion in ways even the king had not anticipated. And yet beneath the practical lessons, an unspoken tension grew. Every glance, every shared word carried weight. Leora saw glimpses of a man who had lived centuries without true connection, and Thalion saw in her a heart unbroken by the harshness of the world, a light he had not thought he could ever feel again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, they returned to a clearing near the village. Shadows danced among the trees, elongated and distorted, as if the forest itself were alive. "There," Thalion said, pointing to the far edge of the clearing. A figure moved among the shadows, barely visible but unmistakable. It was a creature of darkness, its form shifting and elusive, eyes glowing faintly like embers in the night. Leora's breath caught. "What is that?" "The curse manifests in many forms," Thalion said, his voice tight. "This one tests us, observes us. It will retreat if we show strength, but it will return again and again until we confront the source." The creature's eyes fixed on Leora, and she felt a strange pull, as if it were reading her very thoughts. She shivered but stood her ground, recalling Thalion's lessons, recalling her own courage. Thalion stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Do not falter," he said. "Fear is its weapon, confidence is ours." Together they faced the creature. Its form shifted, weaving through shadows, trying to unsettle them, trying to make them doubt themselves. Leora felt her heart pound, but she drew strength from Thalion's presence. She realized that the king was not invincible, that he bore his own fears and vulnerabilities. And in that shared understanding, an unspoken bond began to form. The shadow hissed and recoiled, unable to break the determination in their eyes. It retreated into the deeper forest, leaving only a lingering darkness behind. Leora exhaled, trembling but resolute. "It will come again," she said. "Yes," Thalion said, his gaze intense, "and when it does, we must be ready. But you have shown strength tonight. You are not as powerless as you think." For a moment they stood in silence, the tension between them palpable. Leora met his gaze, and she saw something she had not expected: gratitude, respect, and something softer, hidden but undeniable. She felt it stir something in her own chest, a curiosity, a longing, and a strange comfort. But the moment was broken by a sudden cry from the village. They turned, and a column of black smoke rose into the sky. Leora's heart clenched. The curse was moving faster than she had feared. "We must go," she said urgently. Thalion nodded. "Yes, the shadow does not rest, and neither can we. But know this, Leora, you are no longer alone. I will not leave you to face this alone." As they rode toward the village, the wind whipping through their hair, Leora felt a mixture of fear and determination. She had glimpsed the true power of the king, and she had glimpsed the truth of herself. Together they would face the darkness, yet neither could ignore the growing connection between them. The village came into view, the outlines of houses blackened by smoke, and the first hints of panic stirring among the villagers. Leora's heart ached, but she steeled herself. She would not falter, not now, not ever. Thalion dismounted silently, placing a steadying hand on her back. "We face this together," he said. "Whatever comes, whatever the curse throws at us, we will not yield." The shadows seemed to pulse as they approached. Leora and Thalion moved forward, side by side, hearts pounding, minds sharp and spirits unyielding. The forest and the darkness would not take their courage easily, but they would meet it with every ounce of strength they possessed. As night fell fully over the land, a new presence emerged from the trees, larger, darker, more deliberate than before. It paused, watching them, testing their resolve. Leora felt a shiver run through her, but she did not retreat. Thalion's hand brushed hers, a small gesture that carried reassurance and promise. And in that moment, the bond between them solidified, not through words, not through vows, but through the shared recognition of danger, courage, and the stirring of hearts that neither had expected. The creature advanced, the shadows stretching and twisting around it, and Leora realized that the trial was only beginning. But for the first time, she felt that she would not face it alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, neither would the king of Alenethir. Emotional hook cliffhanger. The shadow loomed closer, its form shifting unpredictably. Leora and Thalion stood ready, hearts intertwined with tension and unspoken feelings, knowing that the night would test not only their courage but the fragile bond growing between them. And as the darkness surged forward, Leora realized that the true danger might not be the curse alone. It might be the truth of the king's heart, slowly breaking through centuries of isolation. The wind swept through the towering spires of Alenethir Palace, carrying with it the scent of the silver rivers that ran through the city. Moonlight spilled over the crystal walls, turning them into pillars of liquid light. Inside, the halls were quiet, filled with echoes of footsteps and whispers that had no one to answer them. Leora walked beside Thalion, her cloak brushing against the marble floor. She had returned to the palace, not as a bride, not as a guest, but as an ally in the battle against the darkness that threatened her village. Her heart still carried the memory of the shadow she had faced with the king, but now the halls of Alenethir brought a new tension, one of politics, secrets, and expectations she had never known. Thalion's presence beside her was steady, commanding, and yet something unspoken hung between them. Every time their hands brushed, a subtle spark ignited. Every glance held a weight that neither dared speak aloud. The king, who had once been distant and unyielding, now seemed burdened with thoughts he could not hide. And Leora, for all her courage, felt the strange pull of curiosity and fear that came from standing so close to power. "The court is restless," Thalion said, his voice low as they walked through a long corridor lined with tapestries depicting centuries of kings. "They speak of you in whispers. Some admire your courage, some fear it, and others, they resent it. You must be careful." "I am not here to please the court," Leora replied. "I am here to protect my people. I will not falter because of whispers." He studied her, his eyes lingering on her face. "Few would speak as boldly to me, and even fewer would stand their ground in the face of what is coming. You have strength, and perhaps more than you realize." They entered the library, a vast chamber filled with shelves of ancient tomes, their spines glinting faintly in the candlelight. Here, Thalion began to teach her what she would need to confront the growing curse, the history of the forest shadows, the old spells, the signs of dark magic. Leora absorbed every word, her mind sharp, her resolve unwavering. Hours passed as they pored over scrolls and books, deciphering warnings written in languages long forgotten. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, and Leora noticed Thalion's eyes often drifted toward her, searching, assessing, and perhaps longing. A sudden noise outside startled them both. The library doors creaked and a servant entered, bowing quickly. "Your Majesty, there is news from the outer village. Another shadow has appeared near the fields. The people are afraid." Thalion's jaw tightened. "Then we must move quickly. Leora, you must come with me." She nodded, gathering a few items and following him through the palace corridors, past courtiers who watched silently, unable to understand the bond that was forming between the king and the peasant girl. Outside, the night air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth. The moon hung low, illuminating the path ahead. As they rode toward the village, the forest seemed alive with movement. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the wind carried whispers that made Leora shiver. Thalion rode with an intensity that demanded attention. His hand occasionally brushed hers as they adjusted their pace, each contact brief but charged with tension. When they reached the edge of the forest near the village, The shadows were already forming, weaving between trees, circling the fields and gathering strength. Leora's heart pounded, yet she did not falter. She had learned from Thalion's lessons, and now she would apply them. The first shadow lunged toward them, its form twisting, its eyes glowing faintly red. Thalion stepped forward, raising his hand, and a protective barrier of silver light formed around them. The shadow hissed, recoiling against the magic. Leora followed his lead, raising her hands and focusing her thoughts, channeling the energy that Thalion had taught her to summon. Together, they moved as one, a dance of light and shadow, courage and skill. The shadows shrieked and twisted, but neither Leora nor Thalion faltered. The bond between them grew stronger with each moment, a silent understanding that each could rely on the other, that together they were far stronger than apart. When the last shadow retreated, dissolving into the mist, Leora let out a breath she had been holding. Thalion lowered his hand, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment the world seemed to stop, the danger, the shadows, the curse, all of it faded into silence. "You are remarkable," Thalion said, his voice soft but carrying weight. "You face fear without flinching. Most would have run." Leora looked down, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I only do what is necessary. I cannot stand by while others suffer." He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. "And yet there is more than necessity here, is there not? I see it in your eyes, the same spark I felt the day you walked into my hall." Her breath caught. The words, soft and deliberate, stirred something within her, a mixture of fear, hope, and longing. She had felt it too, the pull toward him, the curiosity, the strange comfort in his presence. But she could not speak it aloud, not yet. Suddenly, a voice called from the village. "Help, please." They turned to see a group of villagers trapped in a field by a large, shifting shadow. Thalion mounted his horse, Leora following, and together they rode toward the danger. The shadow moved quickly, more deliberate than before, and Leora sensed that this was no ordinary manifestation. It was testing them, learning, growing stronger. Thalion raised his hand, sending a wave of silver energy that pushed the shadow back. Leora mirrored him, focusing with all her might, and together they created a barrier of light around the villagers. The shadow hissed, striking against the barrier, but it could not break through. For a moment they were silent, standing side by side, hearts racing from the exertion and the closeness. Leora noticed the way Thalion's eyes lingered on her hands, on her face, and she felt the pull of something she could no longer deny. "You have grown stronger," he said quietly, "faster than I imagined." "And you have taught me well," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The night deepened, the shadows finally retreating into the forest. Leora and Thalion led the villagers back to their homes, ensuring their safety before returning to the palace. The ride back was quiet, but charged with unspoken words. Every glance, every small touch carried weight. Both knew that the bond between them was growing, and neither could ignore it any longer. When they arrived at the palace, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The city slowly stirred to life, unaware of the danger that had passed through its outskirts. Leora dismounted, and Thalion offered his hand to help her steady herself. Their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. "Thank you," Leora said softly. "For everything." Thalion's gaze held hers, stormy and intense. "Do not thank me yet. There is more to come, and the shadows will not rest, but I will not let you face it alone." Her heart thudded in her chest, and she realized that she trusted him, more than she had trusted anyone before. And perhaps, just perhaps, she cared for him in ways she had never expected. The next days brought more challenges. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, some admiring Leora's bravery, others questioning her place at the king's side. But Thalion remained steadfast, teaching her, protecting her, and slowly revealing glimpses of himself. The man beneath the crown, the heart beneath the legend. They spent hours together in the palace gardens, the library, and even the moonlit corridors, planning strategies to confront the curse and protect the villages. With each passing moment, their connection deepened. Words unspoken hung in the air in glances in the brush of hands. Each moment was a delicate dance, a mix of desire and fear, of longing and restraint. One evening, as they walked through the moonlit gardens, Leora stopped by a fountain, watching the silver water ripple in the wind. Thalion approached silently, standing just behind her. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, his voice soft, "what it would be like if we were not bound by duty and destiny?" Leora turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. "I do, but the world we live in, it does not allow for such things easily." "No," he admitted, his gaze intense. "But I cannot ignore what I feel, not for much longer." Her breath caught. The words, simple yet filled with emotion, made her heart race. She wanted to speak, to confess the stirrings in her own heart, but fear held her back. Fear of the unknown, fear of the consequences, fear of breaking the fragile balance they had built. Suddenly, a distant roar echoed through the city, followed by an unnatural shaking of the ground. Both turned, instincts sharpening. The curse had found a new form, larger, more deliberate, and far more dangerous. Thalion drew his sword, its blade shimmering with silver light, while Leora focused her energy, preparing to summon the protective magic they had practiced together. The night would not be easy, and the challenge ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. And yet, in that moment of looming danger, they stood side by side, hearts beating in rhythm, courage and longing intertwined, ready to face the darkness together. The sky above Alenethir was dark and heavy, weighed down with clouds that seemed almost alive. Lightning split the horizon, reflecting off the crystal towers of the palace, while the wind howled through the empty streets as though warning the city of the danger to come. The curse, which had lingered in shadows for so long, had grown bold. Its presence was undeniable, palpable in every corner of the kingdom, twisting the air with tension. Leora stood at the edge of the palace courtyard, her cloak whipping around her in the wind. Beside her, Thalion adjusted the strap of his armor, his eyes scanning the distant tree line where the shadows gathered. They had prepared as best they could, yet the uncertainty of what awaited them brought a tight knot of fear into both their hearts. "You are ready," Thalion said, his voice steady, though a flicker of concern passed through his storm-dark eyes. "We face what comes together." Leora nodded, her own resolve firming. "Together," she echoed. The first shadow emerged suddenly, sweeping from the forest like a tide of darkness. It was larger than any they had encountered, its form shifting unnaturally, almost human, yet not. Its eyes glowed red like embers, its movement deliberate and intelligent. Villagers who had gathered at a safe distance gasped and fled, while Thalion and Leora stood firm. "Remember," Thalion said, lowering his sword, "fear gives it strength. We will not falter." Leora focused her mind, drawing upon the lessons Thalion had taught her. She felt the energy in the air, the pull of the shadows, the tension of the curse that had lingered for centuries. Together, they moved toward the darkness, their movements synchronized, almost instinctive. The king's hand brushed hers, and she felt a quiet comfort in the contact, a reminder that they were no longer alone. The shadow hissed and lunged, a wave of darkness crashing toward them. Thalion met it with a wave of silver light from his sword, while Leora formed a protective barrier of her own. The collision of magic and shadow sent a shock through the courtyard, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "Keep your focus," Thalion shouted, his eyes never leaving the shifting darkness. "Do not let it touch you." The battle raged, shadows twisting and striking, testing their limits. Each movement required precision, each breath demanded courage. Leora felt the adrenaline surge through her, every instinct sharpened, every fear acknowledged and transformed into strength. She realized that she was no longer the same peasant girl who had walked into the palace weeks ago. She was a warrior in her own right, a partner to the king, a force that could stand against darkness itself. The shadow's form began to shift again, this time taking on a more human shape, almost as if it sought to mimic them. Thalion's eyes narrowed. It learns, it adapts. We must be faster, stronger, united. Leora nodded, her hand finding his as they combined their magic, creating a surge of light that pushed the shadow back. But it did not retreat completely. Instead, it recoiled into the sky, hovering, waiting, testing them still. Breathing heavily, Leora glanced at Thalion. It's not just one shadow. This is the source. He swallowed, his jaw tight. Then we go to the heart of it, we face it, and we end this. They moved toward the deeper forest, leaving the village behind for safety. The trees were twisted and blackened, their branches clawing at the sky. The wind carried the whispers of ancient magic, murmurs of old curses and forgotten deeds. Leora's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the awareness of how close they were to the ultimate confrontation. "You have been brave," Thalion said quietly, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Braver than anyone I have known, but I must confess, I am afraid too. Afraid of losing you, of failing, of what this curse will demand of us." Her breath caught. "Thalion, she paused, searching for words that felt inadequate. "We will face it together. Whatever comes, we do not face it alone." He nodded, but his eyes betrayed a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Then let us finish this, Leora, together." At the center of the forest, they found the source of the curse. A massive, ancient tree stood twisted in darkness, its roots crawling across the earth like serpents. Shadows swirled around it, forming into shapes of despair and pain. The air was thick, almost suffocating, carrying the weight of centuries of magic gone wrong. "This is it," Thalion said, his voice firm yet low. "The heart of the curse." Leora swallowed, feeling both fear and determination. She raised her hands, drawing upon the energy within herself and combining it with Thalion's magic. Together they formed a shield of silver light around them, a barrier against the creeping darkness. The shadows attacked, striking from every direction, trying to pierce their defense, to exploit any hesitation. Leora's focus wavered for a moment as she caught sight of the twisted forms, faces of those who had been consumed by the curse, their eyes hollow, reaching out for life. Her heart ached. "Do not falter," Thalion's voice cut through the pain, firm and commanding. "We can end this." They pushed forward, combining their magic into a beam of pure light that struck the heart of the twisted tree. The shadows screamed, twisting violently as the light burned through them, unraveling centuries of darkness. Leora felt her strength waning, yet Thalion's presence beside her gave her courage she had never known. "Together!" he shouted, and their hands clasped, amplifying their power. The light surged, brighter than the moon, brighter than the stars above. The forest trembled, the air shivered, and then silence. The tree shuddered once, twice, and then splintered, falling into the earth with a sound that echoed through the mountains. The shadows dissolved into the night, leaving only a faint mist behind. The air felt lighter, the wind softer, the darkness lifted. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted, her hands trembling. Thalion knelt beside her, his arm steadying her. For the first time, neither of them spoke. They simply breathed, feeling the weight of what had passed, the cost of courage, and the depth of what had been achieved together. "You did not falter," Thalion said finally, his voice gentle. "You stood beside me, faced the darkness, and did not yield. You have changed me, Leora." She looked up at him, her chest heaving. "And you have taught me strength, courage, and trust. I never thought I could feel this way, even for a king." His eyes softened, stormy and intense, yet filled with warmth. "You are no ordinary girl, Leora, and I am no ordinary king, but perhaps together we can be something neither of us expected." She reached for his hand, and for the first time there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise, a bond forged in fire, fear, and courage. The villagers who had returned to witness the aftermath looked on in awe as the two figures emerged from the forest. Whispers of astonishment spread quickly, for they had seen a king and a girl, A peasant and a ruler faced darkness together in triumph. Yet no words could fully capture what had happened, only the knowledge that a new story had begun. In the days that followed, Thalion and Leora worked to restore the village and heal the land. Crops began to grow again, water returned to the wells, and the forest seemed to breathe more freely. And through it all their bond deepened, not through words alone, but through shared experience, trust, and a growing affection that neither could deny. The palace, too, changed. Courtiers who had once whispered and doubted began to respect Leora, seeing her courage and wisdom. Thalion, once distant and unyielding, became more approachable, his heart no longer bound by isolation. Together, they were a symbol of strength, unity, and hope. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the palace in golden light, Thalion led Leora to the highest tower, where the crystal walls reflected the sky like a mirror. They stood in silence, watching the world below, the wind playing gently with their hair. "You have taught me what it means to trust," Thalion said softly, his hand brushing against hers. "And you have reminded me that even a king can be changed by courage, honesty, and heart." Leora smiled, her own hand finding his. "And you have shown me that even the strongest, most distant heart can be opened, if only we are brave enough to try." For a long moment, they simply stood together, the city sprawling below them, the wind carrying a promise of new beginnings. The curse had been broken, the darkness defeated, yet what remained was far more precious. The bond between them, forged in trials, strengthened by courage, and tempered by trust. Thalion finally spoke, his voice low, intimate. "Leora, I do not know what the future holds, but I know this: I cannot face it without you." She looked into his eyes, the depths of storm and light, and nodded. "Nor can I face it without you." The night fell fully, stars glittering above, and for the first time in centuries, the Elven king felt his heart open, unbroken and free. Together they would face whatever came next, not as ruler and subject, not as king and peasant, but as partners, equals, and perhaps something more. The wind carried the echoes of the battle, the whispers of magic, and the promise of love earned through courage, sacrifice, and trust. The kingdom of Elenethir, once bound by fear and isolation, now stood as a place where hearts could be mended, courage celebrated, and bonds forged stronger than any curse. And as the moon shone on the crystal towers, Thalion and Leora stood side by side, ready to shape their destiny together, unafraid, unbroken, and bound by a love that had survived shadows, storms, and time itself.